Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. Welcome back to the channel. Some of you guys might recognize this car right behind me. It's a 2014 Chevrolet Cruze. It's got the 1.4 liter 4-cylinder turbo engine. And I did a video with this car a couple weeks ago. If you have not watched that video, make sure you go back and watch that before you continue. I'm gonna leave a link in the description. If you did watch that video, you'll know that we were dealing with the check engine light and we had several different codes. More specifically, we were dealing with the P0420, which is a catalyst efficiency below threshold. And at the end of the video, we came to the conclusion that we needed to replace the catalytic converter, even though it had already been replaced a few months ago. I know a lot of you guys were asking for an update on this vehicle. Here it is. The part just came in, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so over here on top of the toolbox, we have the replacement catalytic converter. Now, unfortunately, this is an aftermarket unit. It is a Davico brand from Rock Auto. We were not able to get the OEM one due to budgeting reasons, and also the fact that this is a warranty replacement part. Again, like I said, they recently replaced this a couple months ago, so we were able to get this warranty through Rock Auto. So at this point, there is no extra cost to the owner of the vehicle, which just so happens to be my little brother. So we're really hoping that this replacement part is gonna last much longer than the first one did. Now, if you guys take a look inside of the catalytic converter, you can see our honeycomb material or substrate that's in there. Everything looks nice and clean. It is brand new, so we are going to compare the one that we're going to pull out to this one. We're going to see if that material is damaged in any way. Also, before we put this on, you know, we do want to take a quick moment to do a visual inspection on all of the welds that are on here. You guys can see they do a bead weld around here to seal it off. You know, you want to make sure that you don't have any air leaks or any possible holes. You see in this bung hole area right here where the O2 sensor is going to go. You can see it looks much cleaner on the outside, but it's got this weld that goes around it. You know, I'm pretty sure they pressure test these or leak test these to make sure that they, you know, don't have any holes. So, you know, that's what we're hoping, is that we get one that doesn't have any kind of manufactured defects. Again, taking a look at the weld here, looks pretty clean. This weld here looks pretty clean. The other weld there looks pretty clean. And then finally this one up here, it's got some holes in it, but it doesn't look like they protrude through the other side. You take a look at the inside here. Nope, looks pretty good to me. Anyways, replacing this cat doesn't look too difficult. There's essentially a band clamp up here and then 3 bolts down here at the bottom. And there's a couple of brackets here that needs to be removed. No big deal, we should be able to do this fairly quickly. Okay guys, so we got the old one out of the vehicle up here on the toolbox. And the first thing I wanted to do before I went ahead and installed this is I wanted to do a comparison to make sure that the 2 catalytic converters were the same. Again, these are both the same brand, the same part number. But let me show you guys, there are some differences. So again, this is the one that we took off of the vehicle. And the first thing that you'll notice is that this one had like a heat shield welded onto it. Now, if you look at the one that they sent us as a replacement, it doesn't have a heat shield at all. So I'm not sure really what that's all about. The other thing too is if you notice the brackets on here, if you take a look, you'll notice that they are straight. And if you take a look at the bracket on the one we pulled off of the vehicle, you'll notice that, you know, these tabs are much wider and they're slotted. And if you look at this one right here, the bracket has this kind of L-shaped, and again, the hole is slotted. Again, comparing this to the one that they sent us, you can see that, you know, they're positioned probably in the same way, but they are a little bit different. So I'm not really sure what that's all about. I'm hoping that's not going to create a problem for us. Now, one other thing that I did notice were the flanges here. This is, again, the flange where it meets up to the turbocharger. And if you take a look at this flange here and compare it to this flange, I mean, they look pretty close, but when I went to take this gasket and install it, I noticed that I really couldn't install this gasket here because it doesn't fit around this center pipe here. You guys look closely, you know, I can get like 2 of these tabs on, but you know, I can't get this last one. Now, if you look at it on this one, I mean, it slides right on there. Well, that's because this pipe here is much thinner than this pipe here. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was take a look at the substrate inside of the catalytic converter. We're gonna take a close look at what's inside here and see if we can get a visual on the condition of this honeycomb in here. You guys see that? you can see that this substrate actually looks really, really good. I don't see any excessive oil buildup. It doesn't look dark, doesn't have excessive amount of soot. Actually looks pretty clean. I don't see any cracks or any pieces falling out. When I shake it, it doesn't rattle. I mean, I'm not really sure what to think. Take a look at the other side here. So this is the side coming right off of the turbo and the exhaust manifold. And you can see it looks really, really clean. Now, one of the things I was worried about was whether or not this turbo may have been leaking oil into the exhaust, you know, because that's a possibility. If you have a turbo that has a bad seal, then it's going to be dumping excessive amount of oil into the exhaust, which can cause this substrate in here to deteriorate or clog. But as you guys can see, this one actually looks pretty clean. So to me, it really doesn't look like we have an obvious reason for a P0420 code, other than the fact that maybe this substrate inside of this catalytic converter is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And if you ask me, I believe that has a lot to do with the fact that this is a cheap aftermarket catalytic converter. Again, like I said, unfortunately, we were not able to get the OEM one. So we're just gonna go ahead and put on this replacement part and hope for the best.
A few moments later.
Now that we got this thing installed, let's go ahead and connect the scan tool. All right, guys, so here we have it. We're inside the vehicle. The engine is idling. It's fully warmed up now. It's been idling for about 10 minutes or so. I just stopped here by the gas station to put some gas in it. And as you guys can see, the catalytic converter seems to be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So if we take a close look at the scan tool, you can see the green line is our downstream sensor, and this blue line here is our upstream sensor. And you can see all of this switching we have happening here, the frequency of this upstream O2 sensor. But if you look at this downstream O2 sensor, we have pretty much a flat line somewhere around 67 millivolts. You guys can see it right up here. That is the reading that we have right now. I'm going to raise the RPM a little bit here. You guys can see we have a little bit of movement there. I'm going to let off. You see it come back down. Now what I'm going to try to do right now is I'm going to snap the throttle. You guys see that quick snap? We have that quick reaction here where it went really lean, and you see the reaction here that's coming up. And then now we're back to this flat line here, and we're back to switching on this upstream O2 sensor. So if you ask me, I mean, everything looks pretty good so far. I think my next task is to go ahead and drive the vehicle and try to complete the monitors, because at the moment I did clear the check engine light, so we don't have a check engine light illuminated. But of course, in order to get the state inspection done, we're going to need to complete the monitors. If you guys recall, last time we did this with the old catalytic converter, we were not even able to complete the catalyst monitor, because before the catalyst monitor could complete, it set off that P0420 code. Anyway, I'm going to get on the road, take this thing for a test drive, probably a good 50 miles or so, see if these monitors complete, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, so one thing that I wanted to show you real quick, and this is only because I noticed that the engine started running rough after I filled it up with gas. So I'm here at the gas station. You guys can see the gas pumps over there. So initially, after I put gas in it, I started it up. The engine started running really rough. And so, of course, I had the scan tool with me. I figured I may as well check it while I had it. And, of course, we didn't have a check engine light because it had just started happening, so there were no codes set. And I started going through the data PIDs, and I noticed that the fuel trim values, take a look here. We got the long-term fuel trim at -20, short-term fuel trim, -5. So at the moment, we're running really, really rich. Now, from experience, what I can tell you with a lot of these vehicles, if you have a problem with the engine running rough right after you've just refueled it, the first thing you want to do is locate the purge valve, because what could be happening is that fuel through the evap system is making its way up and through the intake manifold through this purge valve. So if you guys look here, this is the hose that goes back to the gas tank or to the charcoal canister. This is the purge solenoid right here. And then this is the line that goes into the intake manifold. So this is intake manifold vacuum here. But what we should never have in this line is actual liquid fuel. We should only have fuel vapors coming in right here. So a real quick check that you can do is go ahead and disconnect this line here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna disconnect it real quick, and I'm gonna put my thumb over the opening in the intake manifold. Again, looking at the scan tool, we're still negative. You guys can see, I mean, it's getting a little bit better, but we're still at -13, -3. So somewhere around -15, 16, 20. So again, I'm going to disconnect this line here, and I'm going to slowly kind of put my finger over it to keep it from stalling. Again, pay attention to these numbers, -15, -4. So we're about -20 on the fuel trim there. So Again, I just opened this up. I'm gonna try to do this slowly. Oh, come on, keep it alive, keep it alive. There we go. Okay, so I got my finger over the hole. The engine is still running, and take a look at the fuel trim values there. You can see the short term jumped up way positive, 23. You can see the long term fuel trim, -9. So right now it is counteracting itself. It is trying to zero out the fuel trim values, and the engine right now is running much better now that I have my finger over this hole. Again, what we did was eliminated this purge valve right here. And so what we can probably assume is that we have actual liquid fuel coming into this line through the evap system. We can probably even take a look at the line, see if we see any liquid in there. Let's take a quick look here. Yeah, you guys see how it's wet. Sorry about the vibration, but yeah, you can see that we had some liquid fuel coming in through this line here. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we have a bad purge valve. You know, we could also have another problem in the evap system in which the pressure is not venting properly, which is what's causing the actual liquid to come up through the evap system. That's a possibility. Again, you know, we could also have a bad purge valve. So at this point, I don't even think I'm going to take this thing for a test drive. We're going to have to try to figure out what's going on with the evap system on this vehicle, because we don't want to burn up this new catalytic converter.
Tomorrow.
All right, guys, so fast forward. It's now been a couple days later, and I just want to get you guys caught up on where we're at so far. So I went ahead and I replaced the purge valve for the evap system, and that did take care of the rich condition that we were having where we had fuel getting up into the evap system. So I replaced the purge valve, I topped off the fuel tank, drove it around, no longer had any issues with that. But I decided to take the car on a test drive to go ahead and try to finish all of the monitors. Within about 30 to 40 miles of driving, the check engine light came back on. And let me tell you guys, I could not believe it when I used a scan tool to look up the trouble codes. And there it was, a P0420, catalyst efficiency below threshold. Anyways, after taking the drive, the check engine light coming back on, I decided to do some more researching, Googling, and trying out technical forums. And I found out that I'm not the only one dealing with the P0420 on these Chevy Cruzes. So after doing my research, I did find some good technical information that I want to share with you guys in case you're dealing with these vehicles with the P0420 code and you're kind of in the same boat where you're not really sure where to go next. Just stick around. We're going to go over some points that I came across. But right now, I do want to show you something really quick. We're going to move back inside the vehicle where I've got the scan tool connected. All right, guys, so here we are inside the vehicle. I just started it up, and let me show you real quick. If you look right over here on the instrument panel, you can see that we do have the check engine light illuminated. Like I said, we do have a P0420 code. Now, what I have here graphed are the oxygen sensors. Once again, we're looking at the upstream and the downstream. Like I said, I just started the vehicle up, and you can see now that once the vehicle started, the oxygen sensors start switching and doing their thing. Take a closer look here. What you'll notice is that during cold startup, you know, there's some activity here with the downstream O2 sensor that kind of seems like it matches the upstream sensor. Again, this is a cold start. I did just start it up, so the catalytic converter is not warmed up to the point where it needs to be in order for it to function properly. Now, if you guys recall before when I showed you the graph after replacing the catalytic converter, you know, we saw what we were looking for. We saw that the front upstream sensor was moving up and down, and the downstream sensor was pretty much flatlined somewhere up here around 600 millivolts. And that's really what we want to see. But the reason we were seeing that was because, you know, I had the car idling for a while. The engine had already warmed up, and so the catalytic converter was nice and warm. It was hot enough to start doing its job. You guys pay attention. Again, this is a cold start. We've been running for, I don't know, maybe a minute or two or so. And you can see that the catalytic converter still has not heated up enough for it to start functioning properly. Now, we are in closed loop, but the oxygen sensors still are kind of matching each other. Now, what I want to do is I want to kind of take the time to see how long it takes for this catalytic converter to warm up and start working like it's supposed to. So I'm just going to kind of let this thing run in the background, and I'll take note of the time right now. So we just pay attention to this graph. We can see when this green line here, which is our downstream, starts to kind of flatline the way it's supposed to. I guess what I could do while we're at it is I'm going to go ahead and add some other data PIDs. I'm going to go ahead and add the engine coolant temperature data PID and anything else that might be related. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, guys, so as you can see, I added some data PIDs up here. You can see the engine coolant temperature right about 149 degrees Fahrenheit. So the engine is still kind of warming up, but you can see down here where it says cold startup, we're no longer in cold startup mode. So whenever we first start this thing up, there's a period of time where the engine is warming up, And of course, during warm-up, you know, it's going to run a little bit more rich. The engine's going to add a little bit more fuel, try to get the catalyst up to temperature and try to get the engine up to temperature. But right now, we're no longer in the cold startup mode. And if you look down here, we're in closed loop. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here. Again, we're going to take a look at the graph. Our 2 oxygen sensors are still kind of doing the thing where they're pretty much kind of matching each other. You can see there's really not a lot of time delay between the upstream, which is the blue signal here, and the downstream, which is the green signal here. They're still pretty much doing the same thing. Now, of course, again, like I said, the catalytic converter is not heated up enough to start doing what it needs to do. But I mean, we're, you know, at least 5 minutes into it. Look at the clock down here. We're at 6:04 right now. You know, so we have about 5 to 6 minutes worth of runtime, and this catalytic converter still is not heated up enough in order for it to start functioning properly. Okay guys, so fast forward a few minutes here, and you can see on this graph the oxygen sensors are still kind of doing this thing where they're pretty much following each other. Looks like the catalyst has not heated up yet enough for it to start functioning properly. And if you ask me, I'm pretty sure this is ample time for this catalytic converter to heat up. Now, the other thing that I did notice, and this just started happening now, because when I first started this up and it running the first few minutes, the fuel trims did not look like this. We were not negative. We were actually a little bit positive. And now that I'm looking at this, it seems to have fallen down, and we're down to near -20 over here on this fuel trim. I don't know what is going on with this, because earlier we were actually +10. So these fuel trims are doing something kind of funky. I'm not really sure what's going on here with that. That may be a completely separate problem though. And I mean, I hope it has nothing to do with that purge valve, because we did replace it. Now, I will say this, the car is idling just fine. It doesn't have any running issues. You can see the needle is nice and steady on the RPM gauge. But again, this catalytic converter is just not warmed up enough. I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to try to speed this process up by accelerating the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the engine speed. You can see right now we're at around 700 RPM. I'm going to go ahead and raise it to, I would say, let's say around 2500 RPM, and hold it steady and see if we can try to get this thing to warm up. And hopefully we can get this catalytic converter to start functioning. So let's scroll down here and take a look at this graph. Again, take a look at the engine coolant temperature. We're at 176 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm at around 2600 RPM, trying to hold it steady. Let's take a look at this catalytic converter. I guess let's take a look at the fuel trims while we're at it. You can see we're still going negative here, even at 2500 RPM. But again, these O2 sensors, just keep an eye on them. And let's see when this thing starts functioning. All right, so you can see this green line kind of coming up here, and you don't see it dipping all the way down to the bottom anymore. It's kind of starting to form a straight line here at the top, which is really where we want it. Pay attention, you can see how it's slowing down. And there we go. You guys can see we're pretty much flatlining up here where we want it to be. Now that this cat is nice and hot, again, let me scroll up here. You can see we're at 195 degrees now. Engine coolant temperature, engine speed around 2600 RPM. And now our catalytic converter is working. So take a look at that. So I'm going to go ahead and let off of the accelerator. Let this thing come back down to idle. You guys can see the dip in the signal there, but then it comes right back up. So pay attention to this right now. You can see that we're leaned out here, but we're still flatlined up here at the top. So again, here we have a hump right here and a hump right here and a hump right here, but you can see that green line just flatlined. So everything now is working the way it should be. This catalytic converter is nice and warm, and now it's operating like it was designed to operate. Again, I'm going to scroll up. We're going to take a look at the engine coolant temp. Now we're up to 204 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, we're at idle here, and you can see that we're still in closed loop. But again, scrolling down here, now our catalytic converter is working the way it should be. Check that out. But what I still don't like is the fact that looking down here, we're still at -20 on the long-term fuel trim there, which earlier, like I said, it was not negative. We were actually positive like 10 or 15. And so there's something else going on here. I'm gonna have to double check that purge valve and see if that's not giving us an issue at the moment. But the point I'm trying to make here is the catalytic converter, again, it was taking way too long to heat up by itself in order for it to start functioning. We actually had to raise and hold the RPM to try to raise up the engine temperature and raise the temperature of the catalytic converter in order for it to start functioning like it should. Now, is that normal? I don't think so. I'm pretty sure on a normal vehicle or a good operating vehicle, it should not take this long for the catalytic converter to heat up. But in this case, there's something happening here. All right, guys, so I'm back under the hood. And as you can see over here, I'm retrying this test where I disconnected this evap line from the intake manifold. And I've got my finger covering the hole here. Let's take a look at the fuel trims. Almost immediately, they corrected themselves. So you can see our long term here, -1, our short term here, +1. Kind of jumping around, but it's staying near 0. So pretty much immediately after I disconnected this line and put my finger over the hole, we corrected the problem. So we still definitely have a problem with this evap system. Even though I replaced this purge valve, seems to me like we're getting fuel up inside of this line here, and that can really only mean one thing, is that we're probably going to end up having to replace the evap canister, because at this point it only makes sense that more than likely the evap canister is filled with liquid fuel. Okay guys, so moving back over to the issue with the catalytic converter. Again, as I showed you on the scan tool, we could see that the catalytic converter was taking way too long for it to reach operating temperature. As you guys can see, we had the engine idling for around 10 minutes before we decided to go ahead and raise the RPM in order to force the catalytic converter to heat up so that it could start operating properly. Now, the reason I showed you that is because while I was doing some research, I ran across an article on IATN. If you guys don't know what IATN is, it's a forum. It's an online network for technicians. It is a paid forum, but there's a lot of information in there for technicians, especially guys who do this for a living. If you don't know about IATN, look it up, join the network. Promise you, there's a lot of information in there that really can help you figure out what's going on with your vehicle. Anyway, so I ran across an article where somebody essentially was running into the same problem. They replaced the catalytic converter, replaced the upstream, downstream oxygen sensors, and they could not get this P0420 code to go away. And a technician or an engineer chimed in on the forum, and he mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. So what he said was that after 2010, the manufacturer changed the way the catalytic converter is monitoring the catalyst. See, before 2010, when the computer was monitoring the catalyst, it was doing it while you were driving at highway speeds. So what we would do when we tried to complete a catalyst monitoring was to get up on the freeway or on the highway, hit 50, 55 miles an hour, and try to keep that speed steady on the highway for at least 5 minutes or so, because that's really when the computer is monitoring the catalytic converter, and that's how you're going to get the monitor to complete. Well, according to this guy on the forum, what he's saying is that after 2010, the computer is no longer doing it that way. The computer is actually monitoring the catalyst during startup, which I thought was really interesting, because if that's the case, this really does not give us a whole lot of margin of error for our catalytic converter to pass the catalyst monitoring test. And by the way, he wasn't the only one that mentioned that. Somebody else said the same thing. And I thought, well, if 2 technicians are saying that, maybe there's really some truth behind it. So I went back over to AllData and I looked up the P0420 code description for this vehicle in particular. Let me show you guys what I found. All right, guys, so over here on the toolbox, I have the DTC description printed up. And as you guys can see right here at the top, DTC P0420 catalyst system low efficiency. And of course, it gives you a system description, which, you know, I hope you guys are already familiar with. It just tells us that the 3-way catalyst converter works to reduce emissions. And it also goes on to tell you how the ECM determines the catalyst efficiency. I mean, if you read it here, it says the catalytic converter also stores oxygen. The ECM monitors this process by using a heated oxygen sensor that is in the exhaust stream after the 3-way catalyst converter. The downstream oxygen sensor produces an output signal that the ECM uses to calculate the oxygen storage capacity of the catalyst. This indicates the ability of the catalyst to convert the exhaust emissions efficiently. The ECM monitors the efficiency of the catalyst by allowing the catalyst to heat, then wait for a stabilization period while the engine is idling. The ECM then adds and removes fuel while monitoring the downstream oxygen sensor. When the catalyst is functioning properly, the downstream oxygen sensor response to the extra fuel is slow compared to the response of the upstream sensor, which is located before the three-way catalytic converter. When the downstream oxygen sensor response is near that of the upstream oxygen sensor, the oxygen storage capacity or capability and efficiency of the catalyst may be degraded below an acceptable threshold. So again, essentially what it's saying is that the upstream signal is going to move fast and rapidly up and down, while the downstream sensor is going to move across very slowly. That's how the computer determines whether or not the catalytic converter is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, that's information that we already know, or at least you should know if you've already reached this point in the video. But what's really important that I want to show you guys here are the conditions for running the DTC. Now, this is really important because this is going to tell us when the computer is monitoring the catalytic converter for catalyst efficiency. So again, if you guys read over here, it says, before the ECM performs the idle test, again, keyword here is idle test. So this test is being done during idle. The vehicle must be driven under the following conditions. First of all, the engine speed must be greater than 1100 RPM for a minimum of 5 seconds. Now, what this is referring to here is our cold startup. So if you guys know, whenever you first start up a vehicle, you're going to have a fast idle in which the idle RPM is going to be usually above 1100 RPM for a certain amount of time to try to get the engine warmed up. So that's going to be the first condition. And the next one here, it says here that the vehicle speed is less than 1 mile per hour. So this essentially means that the vehicle needs to be sitting still. It cannot be cruising down the road. Next, it tells us here that the engine runtime is greater than 120 seconds. So again, our fast idle here, we're going to have 1100 RPM or above during our fast idle, and it's going to be more than 5 seconds. Usually our fast idle lasts at least about a minute or so. So again, we're going to have the fast idle, the vehicle's not moving, and of course the engine runtime has to be longer than 120 seconds, which essentially is going to be what the fast idle is. So now once our fast idle comes down, let's take a look at the other parameters it's looking at. So again, the run crank voltage has to be greater than 11 volts. Of course, when an engine is running and idling, usually our charging system is sitting somewhere between 13 to 14 volts. Next up, it's looking at the intake air temperature, which, I mean, it gives you quite a range here. It could be extremely freezing outside or it can be really hot. So it doesn't matter as long as the IAT is operating. Next up, it's going to be looking at the engine coolant temperature sensor. Again, it gives us a range here of 104 degrees to 284 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's got to be within this operating range here. The next thing it says here is that the engine has been idling for less than 50 seconds. Now this here is kind of key because if you guys remember up here, it tells us that we have to have a fast idle of at least 5 seconds and our engine runtime has to be greater than 120 seconds, but our engine idle time has to be less than 50 seconds. So essentially, this is happening during cold startup. That means our catalytic converter has to warm up pretty quickly and get into operating range by the time this monitor kicks in and starts watching that waveform. So again, if you look here, the next one, it says the fuel trims between -20 and +30, which is pretty much the entire range. If we go to the next page here, follow it up here at the top, you'll see barometric pressure reading, mass airflow sensor. It gives us a range here. Tells us that the engine has to be in closed loop, and the catalyst here, which is really important because this is the actual temperature of the catalytic converter, has to be at least between 1000 and 1700 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means that this catalytic converter has to heat up really, really fast. And the next thing here says that the automatic transmission has to be in drive range. So that's interesting if it means, or if it's saying that the transmission has to be in drive. I'm not 100% sure about that. But again, this is what the manufacturer wrote out, so this is what I'm following. But this last point here that it makes is really important. So it says here that this diagnostic attempts one test during each valid idle period once the above conditions have been met. This diagnostic attempts up to 8 tests during each drive cycle. So that's pretty much everything that the computer is looking for in order for it to try to determine whether or not the catalytic converter is going to pass. So you guys can see that we don't have much margin for error when it comes to trying to use a cheaper or inferior replacement part for the catalytic converter. A lot of times these aftermarket replacement catalytic converters just won't cut it. They aren't using enough of the precious metals inside of the catalyst material or the substrate in order for it to convert the gases the way the original equipment would. The other problem that I'm noticing here is that it's taking way longer for this aftermarket catalytic converter to heat up. And as you guys can see, in this case with this vehicle, that's just not gonna cut it. So over here on the toolbox, I have two catalytic converters side by side. If you look over here on the right side, this is the original equipment catalytic converter that came off of the vehicle. And if you look over here to the left, this is the aftermarket replacement that my brother put in there. Now, the first thing you'll notice, these two side by side, is just the sheer difference in size. I mean, look at the girth of this catalytic converter compared to this one over here. I mean, it's almost comical. And if you take a look inside, again, the substrate that's in here, now this catalytic converter is kind of dirty because it's been sitting out and we got some rust inside. But I mean, look at the size of the substrate, the honeycomb that's in there. I mean, it is massive. Take a look inside of there and you can see that it fills up this entire shell. And if you look at this aftermarket catalytic converter again, we take a look inside, you can see that tiny little substrate that they put in there. I mean, that's pathetic. So not only is this thing inferior in size, it's also inferior in the amount of precious metals that they actually put in here in order to do the job properly. I mean, hindsight is 20/20, but if you guys ask me now, if you were to look at these two side by side, I mean, you could tell obviously this one cannot do what this one can do from the factory. There's just no way. So right now the plan of attack is we're gonna go ahead and remove the aftermarket catalytic converter that's in the vehicle right now. Again, this is the first one that my brother replaced. We ordered a second one to put into the vehicle as a warranty replacement for this one. But again, the one that's in the vehicle is doing the same thing that this aftermarket one is doing. And with the knowledge and information that we have now, we know that it's better to go with an OEM catalytic converter. Now, like I said, these converters are not cheap. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to send these two aftermarket catalytic converters back. We're going to try to get the money back for those and use that money toward buying an OEM catalytic converter. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this one back onto the vehicle, let them drive it with that while we wait for the refund on these two. I am planning on making another video on fixing the issue with the car running rich / running lean. Whatever the issue is that's going on there, we want to fix that before we replace the catalytic converter, especially if we're going to put the money in to buy an OEM one. So keep an eye out for that video. Like I always say, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it informational. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.